Thanks to those of you who did take time to come out and to participate with us today. For those who are with us on Zoom, welcome. Can we bow our heads for a word of prayer? Gracious and Heavenly Father, we thank you for today. We thank you for allowing us to come together to praise and to worship your name on a Saturday morning. The weather is iffy, but we are grateful for it. We are grateful for you. We are grateful for each other. Lord, as we go about our day, be with us. Let us hear, let us listen and understand, and to get something so that we can take it back and be better within our communities, within our church, within our families. As we go forward in this day, we ask all blessings in your name. Amen. As we get today, we have the delight to hear from Miss Gia Johnson. Gia is part of the Solidarity Building Initiative, and without me messing up anything about her, I am going to allow her to come and to introduce herself and to give you a full understanding of what her ministry is about. And we will go right into the presentation. Welcome again, everyone. Gia.
Thank you, thank you. I'm gonna just, can you all hear me? Okay, yes, okay, perfect. I'll just use this. Okay, thank you so much. Oh, no, here. Well, good morning. Again, I'm Gia, and I'm really delighted and excited to be here with you all today. And I have I'm gonna use every second of my time, and I have a bit of a full agenda for us. And L'Oreal will pull it up for us in just a second. And I'm going to dig in and give you all a little bit of an introduction about myself. But first, I want to kind of go over a little bit of what we're going to do today. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time in the giving us a centering practice. And I'll talk a little bit about what that is in just a second. And then I'll give an introduction about myself, and it'll be a little bit of some storytelling. And I'll weave in also some of the realities around incarceration. And then I will spend some time talking about the historical and present kind of conditions around theological education in a carceral space. And so when I use the word carceral, I'm talking about a prison or a jail. And then I'm going to talk about prison ministry as solidarity and community. I recognize that that is the theme for your all's gathering today. And so when I talk about prison ministry, I'm going to probably using some words interchangeably. So I'll be talking about higher ed in prison, theological education in a carceral space. And when I make those references, I am talking about prison ministry more broadly. But here at McCormick, I would say our prison ministry is SBI. And then I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the actual program. And then we'll do a Q&A a little bit later on after the presentation. So with the centering practice, no worries. So I recognize that the conversation around incarceration, it is a very weighty conversation. It is heavy, it is layered, it is complex. And I am hesitant to call it an issue because really when we talk about incarceration, we're talking about people. We're talking about families, we're talking about individuals, we're talking about communities, we're talking about neighborhoods. We're talking about pain. We're talking about trauma, hurt, fear, isolation, disconnection. We're talking about economies, politics, policy, race, racism, white supremacy. And we are also talking about rebuilding and reimagining a new social order. A social order where all people have access to safety, where all people have access to the resources that they need so that they can flourish. And I say this because it's not lost on me that this conversation is really personal. For some, it is deeply personal in ways that some of us will never understand. Maybe it's because we have a loved one who's been incarcerated. Maybe it's because we ourselves have some sort of relationship to the carceral system. Maybe it's because we have built friendships with people who have the experience of incarceration. Maybe you spend time in a prison ministry. And for others, this might be a really new and foreign conversation. And so there's a wide spectrum of people. And wherever you fall on that, this conversation can stir some things inside of you. Could be triggering. And I want to make sure that we all take care of ourselves. And so throughout our time, I'm going to factor in and give us some moments to pause and just to kind of breathe and reconnect with ourselves. I'm going to be working from a text from Resma, and in your resource guide, Linda was so gracious to put together a resource guide, and it's called My Grandmother's Hands, and it's a guide to racial healing. And so I'm going to be referencing some of his work when we do your follow-up email. We'll also send you a link to the chapter that I'm drawing from, okay? And so if we could show a quote from Resma, and I'm just going to read this. So it's the first slide, L'Oreal. What he says is that our bodies have a form of knowledge that is different from our cognitive brain. This knowledge is typically experienced as a felt sense of constriction or expansion, pain or ease, energy or numbness. Often this knowledge is stored in our bodies as a wordless story about what is safe and what is dangerous. The body is where we fear, it is where we hope, it is where we react, where we constrict and release, and where we reflexively fight, flee, or freeze. If we are to upend the status quo of white body supremacy, we must begin with our bodies. And so what he's saying is that if we're going to do the work of racial healing, it's not just a cognitive exercise. It's not just what we are able to consume, what we were able to regurgitate, but it is actually the work of healing where it resides in our bodies. And that is how we're going to begin to do the work of healing the racial divide that we experience. And we cannot have a conversation about incarceration without talking about race, right? So you might experience a range of these sensations throughout my presentation. And I want, wherever you're at in that spectrum, if you need to get up and step outside, please get up and step outside. I see you. For some of us, it might be resisting the defensiveness, right, around the conversation. And so we want to be able to breathe through that. And the goal of these body-centered practices is really to begin to allow us to have some more internal expansiveness to hold space for difficult conversations. Okay? So if it is okay with you all, I want to invite us to do one of these practices. Let me just pull this up. So wherever you are at, I just ask that you just kind of put your belongings down. If you have paper, if you're fidgeting with something, just give yourself some time just to kind of be present and still. You can have your eyes open. You can have them closed, whatever just feels right for you. And begin to just kind of feel your feet being held, supported by the ground. Relax within your body. If you want to slouch, slouch. If you want to be upright, be upright. Just get really comfortable and connect to what you're feeling in your body. And then begin to just notice your breath. Notice its natural rhythm. Don't force it. Don't push it to go breathe harder. Just allow it to be. And then begin to just breathe in and out deeply and slowly. So a deep inhale. Slow exhale. Pull the air all the way down and into your belly. And just keep breathing. Deeply and slowly. Notice the breath as it flows in through your nose, down your throat, into and through the lungs, and into your belly. Keep this rhythm and this noticing of your breath. And I'm going to offer us a centering breath prayer. So a breath prayer, it's a tradition, it's a practice in many spiritual traditions and the Christian tradition as well. And it really is an opportunity to connect our breath with the sacredness of prayer. Both are sacred. So we're going to honor this time as sacred time with the breath prayer. So wherever you're at on your inhale or your exhale, you can just repeat to yourself what I'm about to say line by line. So on your inhale, I am here now. On your exhale, fully present. In this moment, connected, grounded, open to receive, ready to give, present to co-create, here to nourish myself and my community in solidarity, for strength and hope. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes, return to being here in this physical space. You can look around, smile at your neighbor. Thank you all for joining me in this centering body practice. And I want to invite you that throughout our time, return to your breath. Something feels stirring inside of you. Just remember that you are always connected to your breath, and this can be a stabilizing and grounding reconnection. So we moved through our centering practice, and I'm going to share a little bit about myself. So a few years ago, I spoke to a group of undergraduate students at a public ministry. They were in a public ministry degree program. And I was there to talk with them about my own works of community healing with and for those who are currently incarcerated. One of the students asked me, when was the first time that I had ever visited a jail? It was honestly the first time that anyone's ever asked me that question. And it took me about a second to remember. And I remember it instantly. It was back in 2013, maybe 2014. As a family, we drove about 30 miles to go see my sibling, who was detained in the El Paso County Jail. He spent about a year and a half in the county jail on false charges. At the time, I had recently started my own faith journey, and I was an adult in my early 30s. Neither me nor my loved one grew up in the church. But I often say that God heard the cries of a mother praying, fasting, and wrestling with God to save her children. Me and my loved one have both experienced substantial trauma over the years. He as a young adult, or me as a young adult, and he as an adolescent, and neither one of us had the tools to really support ourselves through healing from those traumatic events. We both use various vices to address some of the impact of these underlying unresolved trauma. And at a very young age, he was exposed to street drugs by an adult teacher, actually. Somebody who was entrusted with nurturing his youthfulness and his development as a young boy. And so at a very young age, since this time, he struggled to really overcome substance dependency. And it was during his time of pretrial detention that Jesus met him in his darkest hour. He was reading the Bible, he was praying, he was reflecting, he was confessing, repenting, and lamenting. He was being discipled by a man who was his cellmate. And he spoke to us about the Bible studies that he was leading and he was hosting. And so while locked in the carceral cage, he experienced the salvation, or as the father of Black liberation theology, Dr. James Cone would say, liberation that comes from the Spirit of God interacting with the image of God in one's own humanity. God moved in and through the church, the ecclesia behind jail walls. And God mothered and nurtured and cared for him and their church community. God met them and my loved one at the foot of the modern day cross, the carceral system. As many liberation scholars would say, there is a double meaning to the cross. It is both a symbol of state-sanctioned violence, and it is also the depths to which God will travel to love humanity back into the wholeness of beloved community. Lee Griffin, in In the Fall of the Prison, Biblical Perspectives on Prison Abolition proclaims that whenever we cage people, we are in reality fueling and participating in the same spirit we claim to renounce. In the biblical understanding, the spirit of the prison is the spirit of death. But there is also the Spirit of God breathing life into those dead places through people. And wherever the Spirit of God is moving and stirring and gathering people to create beloved community, there is the ecclesia and there is God. But the spirit of death that Griffin speaks about extends beyond the carceral walls. In 2014, the charges were dropped and he was released. Over the course of those years, I watched the trap of re-entry barriers, stigmas, and untreated trauma, undiagnosed mental health suffocate his vision and his hope for a new beginning. Over the course of 4 years, I watched him hustle and struggle to actualize his very own slice of the so-called American dream with business ownership. With every decision he made, he moved a little bit closer to his dreams. But moving towards his dreams also came with a cost. He compromised today so that he could get to where he wanted to be tomorrow, which was to be self-sufficient, to thrive, to provide for him and his 2 daughters, no different than what each of us here want for our own selves and our family. And in 2020, while hanging on by a string, he finally made it. He hustled and he struggled to feed and nurture his entrepreneur spirit, and he opened his business. And then COVID arrived. And it decimated his hope, his vision, and his plans. COVID was merciless to him, with the 41% of Black businesses that were disproportionately impacted by the onset of COVID in comparison to their white counterparts. So while my family at the time had not literally been infected by COVID, we did feel its destruction. And yet through it all, it was God and his loved ones who provided the spiritual resources to give him fuel to keep going. The family that supports him has struggled with him. We have carried his burden and our own burdens. We have felt the utter helplessness of navigating a system that was never intended to support him or his family. I've sat with him on the phone while sitting in the parking lot of a treatment facility only for him to be turned away. I've heard the pain of a mother's voice when she calls to tell me the treatment facility let him out only after 3 days. I've heard the hope in my niece's voice only to be disappointed again. We have had to make decisions that no loved one should ever have to make. Negotiating between whose life we are going to protect today. Mm-hmm. We have had to make decisions that no loved one should ever have to make. Negotiating between whose life we are going to protect today. We have made 911 calls begging police officers to please not shoot or detain him, but to please transport him to treatment. Something dies inside of you when you come to the realization that the safest place for a loved one struggling with mental health and substance dependency is incarceration. Because affordable long-term treatment facilities are far and few between and only designated for those on the right side of the wealth gap. Today, he is one of the 40% of people that have recidivated. Recidivating means reoffending, going back into incarceration within the 3rd year of release from incarceration. And 1.2 million individuals who have been criminalized for their mental health. The family that loves him is part of the 6.5 million adults who have an immediate family member currently incarcerated or in jail. 6.5 million families. 6 of 10 African American and Native Americans have an immediate family who has been to jail or prison. Black people are 50% more likely than white people to have a family member who is formerly or currently incarcerated, and 3 times more likely to have a family member who has spent at least 10 years in prison. I share this story because we have to start telling our stories. We have to come out from hiding and speak our truth. So that we can find healing and solidarity with each other as we journey to find solutions to these problems that we have inherited from a legacy and a culture of capitalistic white supremacy, patriarchal. Speaking our truth begins to erode the internalized stigmas that keep us silent about our suffering caused by mass incarceration. And the suffering that we experience is both individual and it is collective. 1 in 4 Black children have a parent who is incarcerated. While Black men make up 6% of the population, they also make up 40% of the prison population. For African American men who are under the age of 35 and have dropped out of high school, the chances that they will serve time in a state or federal prison is approximately 30%. African American and Latina women are the fastest growing segment of the American prison population. Incarceration destabilizes social networks, disconnects family from emotional and financial support, negatively impacts economic and political infrastructures. There are 85 million people who have lost their right to vote. Our so-called correctional facility better prepares people to return to prison than it does to prepare them to live successfully in community upon release. When Cain killed Abel, what was God's response? God did not unleash vengeance, retribution, violence, wrath, or an eye for an eye. God gave Cain a mark of protection and accountability. We cannot have safety without accountability. We cannot have justice without accountability. When harms have been committed, we as the church, the ecclesia, are called to do just as God did, to both protect and to hold our communities accountable, including those who harm and those who have been harmed. Both the harmer and the harmed deserve protection and safety and accountability. So while I am the program director of the Solidarity Building Initiative for Liberative Carceral Education, I am first and foremost the sister to a loved one who has been incarcerated. I am excited to share with you all today. This week, my brother was released, and so he is home. And we are really grateful for that. And I'm also the daughter of a mother and a father who wants to see their son live and flourish and their family to be safe and supported. I'm the auntie to 2 beautiful nieces. I'm a comrade. I'm a community healer. I'm a community member seeking and working to find solutions and resources and to create programs and relationships that have the power to transform our lives, our families, and our communities. And I'm a co-laborer with each of you and God in making justice in this messy place that we call life. And again, I'm Gia, and I'm grateful to be here with you all. And so I know that I shared a lot right now. And I imagine that there might be some heaviness and there might be some stirring. And so I want to invite us to just take a moment and to just reflect. If it feels right, close your eyes. And I'm just going to give us just a moment to just breathe. A reminder that we are here now and that we are fully present in this moment. That this time is here to nourish us and our communities in solidarity, for strength, and hope. So I'm going to go ahead and begin, and you all be exactly where you're at, and I'm going to move on to the next section.
Hello. Could you turn off some of these lights so we can see the screen?
Thank you for that. You can move to the next slide. Thank you. So Kaya Stern is actually a really good friend of mine. And she wrote this book called Voices from American Prisons, Faith, Education, and Healing. And she chronicles the history of prison education. And so during the birth of the penitentiary from the late 1700s and the early 1800s, it was common belief that criminality was the result of personal evils and dishonest companions, having very, very little to do with social, economic, and political evils, or as we might say, social sins. And this is much like it is today, that the issues that we experience were rooted in the individual and not so much in the social and economic conditions that create oppression to begin with. So while indigenous people were experiencing genocide and forced removal from their land, and Black people were enslaved in chattel slavery and policed by fugitive slave laws, the penitentiary was primarily an institution created to rehabilitate white law-breaking men to become more law-abiding citizens. In 1819, the Auburn State Prison in New York became the leading model for the prison construction. It was referred to as the congregant style model, and it combines Bible study with industrious toil to produce the desired effects of reforming the person. Those incarcerated at Auburn State Prison were subjugated to a range of abuse, violence, and exploitive practices of punishment through the use of religious education, forced silence, isolation, prison labor, and convict leasing. Stearns rightly assert that the Auburn model deformed rather than reformed the individual. Tragically, this malformation and abuse was deeply influenced by Christian tradition. Elm Linz, the first warden of Auburn and later at Sing Sing, was a Calvinist who believed that all convicts were cowards who could not be reformed until their spirit was broken. Linz is known as one of the most influential architects of the early development of the prison system. And it was under his leadership that prison practices became increasingly more degrading, punitive, and violent. With Auburn State Prisons, Linz ushered in the exploitation of prison labor as a part of the character of the prison, which in many ways set the stage for the penitentiary to become the new plantation, replacing the newly abolished system of chattel slavery with convict leasing. While the violent, abusive, and exploitive nature of the penitentiary cannot be denied, history also reveals the transformative effect that prison education had on incarcerated learners. Megan Sweeney in Readings is My Window, Books in the Art of Reading in Women's Prisons, shares the following remarks offered by a warden shortly after the Civil War. Young men who were 2 years ago taught first lessons here are now good readers, and it seems as if they have changed entirely in body and mind. He goes on to say, ignorance makes many convicts. Education alone makes the man. And in spite of the warden's dehumanizing ideologies towards incarcerated learners, access to spiritual readings and educational resources had a transformative impact on the lives of those who were incarcerated. And this is also true today. Education is transformative, regardless of the social location and social identity that someone resides in. It also cannot be overlooked that the warden's comments came on the heels of the abolition of chattel slavery, and that he was referring to white incarcerated people. Black folks were primarily held captive in the economic system of chattel slavery, which by its very nature breeds the practice of punishment, violence, and illiteracy as a means to exploit Black labor. It was the abolition of chattel slavery that began to shift the penitentiary population. So while chattel slavery was abolished, the spirit that gave it life, a race-based capitalistic political economy of white supremacy, took on a new life in the form of convict leasing, shifting penitentiary demographics from white men to newly freed Black people. Rather than being privately owned by slaveholders, newly freed Black folk became the property of the state for violating Black codes and vagrancy laws instituted by the state. And under this new system of slavery, the 13th Amendment made it constitutionally permissible for Southern states to literally lease Black bodies to former slave owners, replacing slave labor with convict labor. In doing so, convict leasing protected and sustained the capital investment of white billionaires and the largest single financial asset in the entire US economy at that time, Black labor that was worth $3.4 billion. So just as in the era of chattel slavery, illiteracy and education were tools to keep Black convicts, now part of the penitentiary as good, ignorant laborers, Sweeney writes this: economic incentives were completely trumped. Efforts to educate prisoners became because African Americans were considered purely animal and incapable of learning. It was deemed wasteful to provide prisoners with opportunities for education and rehabilitation. The record of the late 19th century penal practices suggests that African American convicts were considered nothing, totally dispensable, and were therefore given nothing to read. The de jure prohibition of reading by African Americans in the antebellum South was thus succeeded by the penal system's de facto prohibition of reading by thousands of African Americans who were shunted from slavery into convict leasing. So our history reveals that the penitentiary replaced the plantation as the primary gatekeeper of the white ruling class, ensuring that the theft of Black labor and that education was only a human right for those whom the white ruling class deemed human, white men in particular, and white people in general. It cannot be forgotten that Christianity and religious education played a fundamental role in shaping prison culture and practices into what it is today. So I'd like to invite you all to engage in some dialogue with your neighbor or at your table. So I'm going to give you all just a few minutes and just share what is one thing that stood out to you and why.
One thing of what?
One thing from what I just shared.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I'm going to give you all about 30 more seconds, and then we'll begin to wrap up conversation. Okay, so I love hearing all of the conversation and chatter, and I hope that you all were able to have a really good conversation. There will be more time for us to do that as we move through this presentation. But I'm going to go ahead and move us on to the next section of our time together. So with the history that I just shared in mind, prior to my work here at McCormick, before I do that, I want to say hello to our guests on Facebook and Zoom. Welcome, and please do engage in the chat box. And we would love to hear your feedback as well. So I will be sure to note that as I move through the presentation. Okay, so with this history that I just shared in mind, prior to my work at McCormick, I came across some statistics that have been in large part a driving force for a lot of the work that I do. One of the things that I discovered was that 95% of the prison population will be released. Most of them returning back to the same disinvested zip codes that created conditions right for hyperincarceration to begin with. There are 2.2 million people who are incarcerated, and 95% of them will be released. And the rates of recidivism are high within the first 3 to 5 years. And so they return back to the same conditions, such as inadequate access to quality education, reliable transportation, lucrative jobs with livable wages, healthcare, including treatment for mental health and substance dependency. Moreover, there are over 40,000 collateral consequences or re-entry barriers, what some activists would say permanent punishments that prohibit folks from incarceration, prohibit people who with the experience of incarceration from successfully navigating in society upon release. So nearly half of those restrictions are related to employment. And so upon release, those who have been deemed the criminal class are transferred from the physical cage of incarceration to the cage of social bondage through re-entry barriers and permanent punishments. The Fully Free campaign is a coalition here in Chicago by Heartland Alliance, and Marlon Chamberlain is the director of the Fully Free campaign, and they have a report on permanent punishments. And one of the things that's in that report is that here in Illinois, 28 sanctions govern education. There are at least 365 state laws and regulations that restrict occupational licensing from people with a criminal record. A key barrier to education noted by people with records includes not having sufficient financial support to pursue an education, either by keeping them from financial aid or needing to keep a job in order to provide for one's family. According to prisonpolicy.org, formerly incarcerated population makes up the most active job-seeking population. However, their unemployment rate is 27% in comparison to the 5.2% unemployment for the general population. And oftentimes employment is a condition of parole or probation. And so they go on to report that formerly incarcerated people looking for a job is worse than that of the Great Depression. And so without stable employment and livable wages, justice impacted people become vulnerable to homelessness. One study indicated that 79% of formerly incarcerated individuals could not secure stable housing. And without the necessary resources, the odds of recidivism increase. And law breaking actually becomes survival crimes. So even more troubling is the reality that prisons and jails offer limited educational programming and resources that are necessary and critical in preparing incarcerated people to flourish upon release. This is some old data, but I think it's still relevant. In 2016, the Barry Institute of Justice reported that only 35% of state prisons provided college-level courses, and that these programs only serve 6% of incarcerated individuals nationwide. I'm going to put this in perspective. There are nearly 2,000 state correctional facilities that incarcerate approximately 1 million people, which means that 700 facilities offer college-level courses to approximately 120 incarcerated people. Right. So the need for educational supportive resources in incarceration is great, right? There was a study, or actually a friend of mine, Nakia Roberts, shared this in one of her presentations. She said, a glance at a budgetary spending reveals societal and institutional values. How you spend your money talks about what you value the most. It costs on average approximately $106,000 per year to incarcerate a person in California prisons, which is more than the tuition cost to attend Harvard University. We spend more to incarcerate than we do to educate. And that's not just for adults, that's even for children. In spite of knowing that higher ed and prison programming provides tangible impact, for every dollar invested in prison education, and I want to be clear here, we are investing in people. When we go in and we offer these programs, it is people that we are investing in. And for every dollar that we invest in prison education, we actually reduce the cost of recidivism by $4 to $5, which means that less people are going back into incarceration. More people are able to actually flourish upon release. 43% of research found that individuals who participate in correctional education programs have a 43% lower odds of returning to prison than those who do not. For those who had access to higher ed in prison, it increases their employment by 13%. So there is some real impact to doing higher ed in prison programming. And so what I'd like to do is give you all a little bit more time to just kind of dialogue around what I just shared. And again, what is something that just really kind of stood out to you about the second half of this conversation? So I'll give you about 3 minutes. You need 20. I know, right? So how about we do 5 minutes? Okay. All right, that is our timer. So we all just want to come back to the big group, and thank you to those who are on Facebook and Zoom. I hope that you all had a lively discussion as well. And so we are making our way through our time together. So we're gonna move into the piece around prison ministry as solidarity in community. And so while I was working on my MA in public ministry, I really began to think about these startling statistics and this history with the seminary in mind. And so I began to really kind of think and ponder about what it would look like to create a program of theological education in a prison with solidarity as its foundation. And so my final capstone project was literally called Institutional Leadership as Solidarity. And so what I learned in my capstone project is a lot of what I have used to kind of think about how we do this work here at McCormick with SBI. And so one of the things that's really struck me right before, this was in 2020, right before COVID hit, we were in the jail teaching a class. I was there with Barbara Wilson, Dr. Barbara Wilson. And one of the students had asked this question to me, said, what is McCormick's end goal for providing courses at the jail? And he said, is the end goal to make model inmates? Because for me, I'm fighting for my freedom. The many courses that I have taken while incarcerated have transformed me. I am no longer the person that I once was before incarceration, and I need this growth, this progress, and this investment in my education to have an impact on the outcome of my future. And so we are in a jail. And so I just want to note for folks who might not know, a jail is called pretrial detention. So people who are in a jail have actually not been convicted of any crime. Once a conviction has been made, then they move on to prison. And that's where you have more longer sentences. At the Cook County Department of Corrections, we work in a maximum facility division, which means that folks who are in pretrial detention have been in jail waiting for maybe 4 years, 6 years, 9 years, 10 years. They could have gotten a whole PhD, the amount of time that they've spent in pretrial detention at the Cook County Department of Corrections, okay? And so his question around model inmates, he's really asking, are we interested in fixing him, changing him, coming in to save him? Or her, right? Yes. And not actually the situation which created the oppression to begin with. What are we here to do? And so I want to unpack solidarity as part of our prison ministry by unpacking the name, Solidarity Building Initiative for Liberative Carceral Education. When I think of solidarity, I think of power. How do we use our power? So this quote from Martin Luther King, power without love is reckless and abusive. Love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. And justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. We can't have solidarity without power. We can't have power without love. There is this balance between the two of them. And how do we use both of them? And so I created this slide with some characteristics of what I think solidarity looks like. This is not exhaustive, and I'm sure that there are plenty of folks in this room right now that we could start building and adding to this list. So, and I encourage you to do that. Maybe that can be a conversation that you could have at your table at our next break. So I would say that some of the characteristics of solidarity is it's power with, not power over. We aren't subjugating, dominating, coercing. We aren't coming in with all of the knowledge and all of the information, and the people there don't have anything to offer, right? So it's a shared power. It's having a historical literacy, having an understanding of the history that has created our present moment. It is about personal and social transformation. I think oftentimes we can come in this place of social change work, doing the work of justice, only interested in changing the system without recognizing that we too are a part of that system. And that we too need to go through our own personal transformation. So it is personal and it is social. And there is work that each of us need to do in the process. It is about resource sharing, not resource hoarding. But how can we come together and collectively share these resources in the service of making justice, in the service of those who have been most marginalized? It is Ubuntu. Ubuntu is a South African proverb, and it is I am because we are, and we are because I am. Right? We are an interconnected web of beings. When one is not well, the whole body is not well. Our liberation and our freedom is bound up in one another. And that is what solidarity is about. When one gets free, we all get free. It is about collaborating, not being saviors. People don't need saviors. People need partners, collaborators, co-journers, people to stand in the gap, people to intercede, people to advocate. It is humanizing. It is the language that we use to talk about the people that we are in relationship with. People are not defined by their circumstance. That is not their identity. It is a part of their story. And humanizing somebody means that we get to know them, the fullness of who they are. It is about awareness of internalized superiority as well as internalized oppression. And so this leads me to our next slide. This isn't, so on the resource list that Linda put together, this is not on there, but everyone can Google the characteristics of white supremacy culture, and you can find a handout on it. We can even probably put it in the follow-up communication. But part of doing this internal work is understanding the characteristics of this culture that we are all a part of and being aware of them. And how do we actively work towards creating a new culture that is liberative, a culture where people can flourish. And so I will share that this is a quote that's from a theological standpoint around solidarity. I really love this quote from Duncan McLaren, the way he talks about solidarity. Jesus' solidarity has broken through the division between neighbor and non-neighbor, but it is still a solidarity which takes the side of the poor and oppressed against that of the rich and oppressor. Not because Jesus sees poverty as a virtue, but because poverty is the result of unjust relationships between human beings, provoking the intervention of the Messianic King. Justice between human beings should reflect God's justice, which lies in hearing the cries of the oppressed and then joining them in efforts to liberate them. So it is personal and it is social. We cannot have solidarity without both. So with an understanding of what solidarity is, I would say that liberative carceral education, doing prison ministry from a perspective of solidarity, means that we aren't going in to give charity. We are going in to do the work of solidarity. It is about mutual aid, part of resource sharing. So mutual aid is actually a strategy that is part of the abolition movement. Abolition is a sexy word these days, and it has a lot of different meanings for a lot of different people. And I'm going to hopefully maybe kind of add some clarification around what abolition actually is. Okay. So abolition is, where do I want to begin? So abolition really is about seeking the root causes of what creates oppression to begin with. So abolition does not just mean the closing of prisons, but also the presence instead of vital systems of support. That means the communities oftentimes lack. So abolitionists, instead of asking how in a future without prisons will we deal with so-called violent people, abolition asks, how do we resolve inequalities and get people the resources they need long before the hypothetical moment, as Ruth Wilson Gilmore would say, they mess up. So it's about getting to the root of our social issues and then creating solutions from there. There is a lecture that is in your resource guide that was given by Darnell Moore. He gave it at Chicago Theological Seminary, and it is an abolition theology. It is powerful. I highly recommend that everybody watch this lecture. And this is a quote that he says, abolition is a form of analysis and organizing practice that is not centered only on the removal of the systems that harm us, but the process of imagining into being the life soul affirming tools that ought to go in the place of things that harm us. According to Wilson, abolition is figuring out how to work with people to make something rather than figuring out how to erase something. Abolition is ultimately a politics and praxis of creation, not just destruction. It demands that we broaden and diversify our imagination to activate, complicate, and stretch what Robin D.G. Kelly calls our freedom dreams. Abolition is about resurrection. Abolition is about creating a new social order, one where people have justice and flourishing and access to these resources, right? And so one of the strategies of abolition is this mutual aid. And so I think one of the things that distinguishes mutual aid from other forms of benevolence is that mutual aid is inspired by collective cooperation for the sake of the common good, and it is always tied to organizing for systemic and structural change. Mutual aid is community care in which people band together to meet the immediate survival needs of those around them, usually because of a shared understanding that the systems in place will not meet those needs, or certainly not fast enough, if even at all. And so when I think of mutual aid in the context of prison ministry, and I'm just using our name, the Liberative Carceral Education, these are some of the characteristics that I see playing out. Is this piece around mutual transformation, is that when we go in to do our prison ministry, we too are on journey to learn and to grow from those with whom we are in relationship with. Our students and our participants are educators and teachers in their own rights. And we are there to learn from them just as much as they are there to learn from us. It is a mutual transformation. It is democratic. They have equal voice. They get to be co-creators in this work that we are doing together in prison ministry. They have ownership in it and voice. It is inclusive. We create space for lived experiences to be just as authoritative as the authors that we are reading and the language that we use. So in your resource guide, I don't know if I've already said this, but there is this language guide that's created by the underground scholars. And read it, check it out. And this will give you some information on how to talk about people and their situations of incarceration, right? We don't call folks who are incarcerated detainees or inmates. They're people with the experience of incarceration, right? And so we use inclusive language. I've already mentioned we honor the lived experiences of those who we are in partnership and community with. It disrupts hierarchy, which means that we have some analysis around what the power structures that be look like. The ways in which our own internalized superiority shows up in these spaces, right? We can disrupt hierarchy by the authors that we bring in our Bible studies, right? Or our book clubs that we're reading from. Are they authors who have the experience of incarceration? Are they Black men, Black women, women of color, right? A diversity of voices that we can help to disrupt some of the hierarchies in our carceral spaces. It also means bringing in people who have the experience of incarceration to learn from them, have them be consultants, get their feedback on how to shape your prison ministry, inviting them to go in the jail and be co-facilitators, leaders of Bible studies and book conversations. So there's a lot of ways that we can do this work of prison ministry from this place of solidarity. And so I would say that to heal, so one of the things that I think about for liberative carceral education is that when we do this work, at the core of it, oh, I'm sorry, you know what? I missed some things here. I'm sorry, let me go back down here, trauma informed. I would say the other piece is that it is trauma informed, right? Like having an awareness that the participants that we're working with, they are experiencing trauma while they're in the facility, as well as the trauma that they have experienced prior to, and having an awareness around that. And I would say that all of these things are part of how we foster healing and liberation in our work of prison ministry as Solidarity. One of the things that comes to mind for me is a quote from Bell Hooks, and she says that to heal our wounded communities, which are diverse and multi-layered, we must return to a love ethic, one that is exemplified by the combined forces of care, respect, knowledge, and responsibility. And so I would say that when at the core of this, when our prison ministries has a love ethic that is directed at promoting healing and liberation that is both individual and social, we are doing the work of solidarity. And it helps us to guard against participating in the project of creating model inmates. So with all of this in mind, I want to give you all some time. And I would also, let me see, where are we at? So you won't be able to get through all of these questions, but I want to invite you all to spend some time reflecting on these questions in your small group. And these are also questions that you can reflect on later after our time together. And then what I'd like to do is give us 5 minutes, and then I'll come back, and then I'm going to wrap up my presentation, and then you all will go on your break, and then we'll come back and do some Q&A. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and bring us back to the big group. I love hearing all of the rich and generative conversation.
Yeah.
There will be some time for you all to continue to have dialogue while you're on break. But I do want to go ahead and get us to finish up the rest of this presentation so that you all can go on your break, and then we can do some Q&A. So where we are at right now is I'm going to share a little bit about actually SBI's program and what we do. So the Solidarity Building Initiative, our mission is to seeks to mitigate the numerous material, social, and political barriers that system-impacted individuals and their families experience while incarcerated and upon release. And so the way that we imagine doing this is that seminary ed and jail will not only provide resources for intellectual and spiritual growth and flourishing for incarcerated learners, but that the program will also create communities of belonging and advocacy. And so how do we do this? So we have 4 different programs that we work with. And so our flagship program is the work that we do going into the jail, and we offer 2 certificates. And we do some workshops and other things as well. So the first certificate is an intro to theological studies. And so do biblical foundations, theological reflection. We've done a course on theories and the theology of Martin Luther King. We've done some on Black liberation theology. So a various range of biblical and theological courses. The second certificate that we have is the certificate in community healing, which is one that that we just started. And it really is focused on public ministry. It is about practice of how do we do the work of healing our communities as a form of public ministry. And so our students are both practitioners and students. So they actually get a lot of hands-on experience with learning how to do facilitation, how to do meditation and mindfulness practices, how to kind of create strategies around working within their communities upon release. And we have a lot of fun in the community healing course as well as the other courses. And then we have collaborative partnerships. So this work isn't done alone. So a lot of our work is done in conversation and partnership with community-based organizations. We do quite a bit of work with formerly incarcerated organizers. And so we actually bring in folks, and they're co-facilitators with us, and they help us create some of our courses. And then we also have public ed and advocacy as well, which is where we do the consciousness raising creating educational programs. I would say that me being here right now is part of that, right? So we also have, and so I'll just kind of share some of our program metrics. We've done 10 courses. We've done 9 extracurricular workshops. We've done workshops on film editing. We've done some on writing prayers of lament and part of our prayer collective book. We've done one on songwriting, particular protest songwriting. We've done, what else have we done? We've done some on, I think that about sums up some of the workshops that we've done. And then we also have served 80 students, and including women. So last year was our first time working at the women's division. And so we were excited to be able to expand our programming there. We've also have had 12 students complete the certificate in theological studies. So in order to complete that certificate, you have to do 2 courses. And part of some of what happens at the jail is it can be transient. So just because students in our program are there for 6 or 8 years, it doesn't mean that they might not leave halfway through class. So this semester we've actually lost 2 students. Sometimes it's not necessarily that they get discharged, but sometimes they get moved off the deck and they get housed somewhere else. And then we've had 6 students who have completed the certificate in community healing, and we're actually going through another round of students right now in a course called Body-Centered Practices for Community Healing, where we actually are using My Grandmother's Hands. We're using that text, and we're teaching them how to be facilitators of racial healing conversations. And then to our knowledge, we have 4 students who have left the jail. It is a little difficult to track the exit process because we don't always get that information. And then I want to share with you, you can go to the next slide, L'Oreal. So then I want to share with you just an opportunity to invite you all to come and join us if you're able to. But this is our 5-year anniversary. So we're celebrating 5 years of doing this work in the jail, and we're really excited about it. And so we're going to be celebrating all year. And we have some pop-up events that we're going to do. So Through These Bars was a workshop that we taught last fall, and it was on protest music. And so students were invited to learn from the history of Black music as a template to transmute the raw, hard emotions around oppression into something constructive, the music. And so they created their own protest songs. And so we had them produced, and we have these really great visual components to it. And so we're gonna do our listening party, and we're going to engage in a dialogue around the songs that the students wrote. And then there's going to be a community art project. And the community art project is going to be an opportunity for the participants to respond to the students' songs by creating themes for a 3rd song. And Hakim Doe and Richard Wallace are our artists, and they're going to lead the conversation around the themes. And then they are going to write the song lyrics and produce it. And then we are going to showcase that song at our next pop-up event, which will happen later in the year. And so this will be an opportunity to kind of really see our programming, get to learn a little bit about our students. And so it's going to be on May 11th at Little Black Pearl, and it will be hybrid. So you can also join virtually if you're not able to join us in person. And then I want to invite you to check out our websites. If you feel so inclined to support the work that we do, feel free to go to our Take Action, and you can learn more about that. And our website is on this graphic. It's sbimccormick.org, and we are also on all the social media channels. So that concludes my time with you all, and I wanted to say thank you again for participating, being curious, and engaging in such rich conversation with each other. And I hope that this time was nourishing for you all. Thank you.
At this time, we're going to
Yeah.
We're going to take a quick break about 5 maybe. Can you hear me? Okay. We're going to take a break about 5 minutes. For those of you who may need to use the restroom, it is down the hall So the left, straight down, and it's going to be on the right-hand side. And feel free to take some more of the snacks off the table. We will have lunch in a little bit, but come back. And if you have some questions, we're going to do a question and answer time for Gia, and she'll be able to answer some of those questions that you may have had while you're sitting and engaging in listening and understanding. So we'll take about a 7-minute break. Okay. All right, let's get started. What we will do is if there's any questions or if even any comments, anything you want to touch on, let us raise your hand and I can bring you the mic. Or if you're online, yes, put it in the chat and we will get that question or comment answered. Hold on, let me bring you the mic.
Lily Cox, sixth grade Presbyterian. Is it on?
Move it, yeah. it should be.
Okay. Lily Cox from sixth grade Presbyterian Church. I had a nephew that was in prison in Jefferson City, Missouri. And he is out now and preaching. And one other thing I want to tell you, if I have a problem, I can call him. He gives me a scripture to read. So I'm so proud of my nephew that he's no longer in prison. You're welcome.
Anyone else?
Study been done on people who repeat prison, they go back. I know right now I'm going through something with, thank you, with the young man that I know. I guess it was about 10 years ago when he had to go to prison. And it hurt me deeply to see him go. I was really hurt over that. He had lost his mother, and I figured he lacked guidance. And I wrote to him while he was there to offer him encouragement, and I would send him something monthly. And then he was released about 3 years ago. And I was so grateful to God to see him. He came back. I know him from the bridge club where I played bridge. He was teaching a bridge class and his students loved him. He had a job. He had a really good bridge partner and they were winning. And just a few weeks ago, I heard that he's back in prison. I used to see him and I would thank God that he had blessed him so to be enjoying such a beautiful life after prison. And now, I mean, just being here today, hearing about prison, is this a calling from God for me to reach out to him again? Because I was really confused as to why he ended up going back. And I'm puzzled. Why does this happen to someone again?
Hear me? Huh. You know? You don't mind me asking? Frank. I'm sorry to hear about Frank. I think that recidivism is hard. There is a lot of studies out there that the hardest time for folks coming out of incarceration is between 3 to 5 years. So in the 3 to 5 years of someone returning where it's the most critical. And part of what happens is that it's difficult to reacclimate, back into society, especially when you are faced with so many various stigmas and a lot of those barriers, right? Finding access to stable housing, employment. And so I say that to say is that one of the things that's really helpful is the community, is having that support system. And it sounds like you were a part of that support system for him, and the being able to start that support system while he was incarcerated through letter writing is also really helpful in helping folks be able to kind of have that upon release. Why he went back, I don't know, right? There could be so many circumstances to why this happened that could honestly really not be because he did something egregious, right? And so I would say that I can't tell you what to do, right? But if you feel led to rekindle a relationship, I think that's something that you should do. I know that maybe that might not be the most helpful, but I think that if you have questions and if you have that type of relationship with him, rebuilding it wouldn't do any harm. I'll be praying for him and for you.
There is a question in the chat also, from Linda Gibboni. Sorry. Okay. There's a question in the chat from Linda Gibboni. She said, are there any state laws that require education for inmates, even for a GED?
There are no laws that mandate education for anybody incarcerated. I know at the Cook County Department of Corrections, they do work really hard to be able to bring in those programming. GED is one of the areas where there is a great need regarding tutoring, but there is nothing there's no policy that somebody has to get their GED.
Good morning.
Yes.
I really enjoyed your presentation. And what I'm going to take out of it is that I love the idea that we're to go to do this work in a collaborative way, not in a way that we're authority or that we're so superior. So I think that's very important.
Thank you.
My question is, when you have an individual that has come out of the prison and they understand the collaboration between the two of you all, what type of program do you have available for them to keep their minds going to move forward, as opposed to knowing that they could go back in the situations that the end, like you said, can't find employment?
Yeah.
How do you help and assist them to keep their minds going in a positive direction, as opposed to saying it's better? The actual words to me were, it's better with 3 hots and a cot. Then it's easier in there and to deal with what's inside, rather than to actually come out here and knowing that I can't get absolutely nothing. And my mind goes in what you said, that rabbit hole, as opposed to thinking I know God and I know what he can do, but that's not enough because I still can't find a place to stay or put food on my table.
Absolutely. So I think the first thing is that in the relationship that you're building, it's really their agency, right? And so it's like, what do you need? And how can I be of support in that? And so I think that's always the first question. And then based off of whatever that question is, I would say that one of the things that I've heard in this work is finding partnerships and relationships with people who have the experience of incarceration are really powerful for people coming out of incarceration. And so there are a number of places that you could recommend for somebody to consider, right? So like I mentioned already, the Fully Free campaign, It is a coalition that is led by directly impacted people. And most of those folks that are in that room are people who have various programs and are doing a lot of work in the community. There's another friend, Aaron Smith, with Escaping the Odds. He has a podcast where he interviews formerly incarcerated entrepreneurs. And he actually is now going into the prisons and doing reentry education programs. And so that's another network. I would say Equity and Transformation on the west side of Chicago is another place. They do some really amazing work and they have a large network of directly impacted folks as well. I would say for women, Willette Benford, who was an organizer with the Live Free Chicago. She does a lot of work with women who are coming out of incarceration and forming relationships with women. She actually is, she works for the city now, doing reentry programming. So I would say that those are the things that would be helpful. I think that we can't change somebody who, we are an accompaniment with them, right? And I think you being a support to that person and then being able to connect them with those resources, but they've got to use those. Thank you. I really enjoyed the
Sources.
we can share. Collaboration and we all coming together. Yeah, so in the follow-up email, we can include some of those links and resources. Yeah.
Any other questions, comments?
That maybe, I'm wondering whether there could be training for church people to learn about how to be a counselor or friend to a returning citizen. I'm wondering if there could be some kind of group that agrees to learn and do some of that. There are prison congregations in some parts of our country that are denominational churches inside prison. I don't know if you've heard of them. It's Prison Congregations of America, and there are Lutheran. There are some different denominations that have a congregation inside the prison, and the churches around that community pay the preacher. And the prisoners are happy because one was heard to say, I'm tired of getting saved. I just want to serve. So, a lot of church groups have gone into prison to save people, but they are happy to be a congregation and even raise some money to help others or whatever. And so the churches that give money to pay the preacher of these prison congregations come and visit the church inside. And some of them who have been doing it for a while end up being supportive to people who are released. And it's been a big education for the church people who want to be helpful, because there's so much they can't imagine about what that person is going through and how they need support.
Absolutely.
So that gave me a picture of possibility in terms of that. But one good thing about those places is that some of these church people have already met the the prisoner congregants who then get out.
Thank you for sharing that. So what I'm hearing you say is that are there trainings or workshops available to support congregations who want to do prison ministry?
I guess that's a fair way. And I guess I was imagining if there are trainings for congregants outside to help them specifically with people who get out.
Okay, on the reentry side and being able to support them with the different resources.
That's a whole ministry that's different from
Mhm.
serving the people that are inside.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's important.
So what I would say is that, yes, I believe that there are programs and workshops that are available to work with folks to prepare them for reentry. And I'm sure that there can be workshops that could be customized specifically to work with churches and congregations. I think that's an excellent idea. And if that's something that your church wants to participate in, I think that there would be resources available for that.
I would like to ask a question or make a statement. On your last slide, you talked about the work that SBI does and the work that you do and a lot of your collaborative partners do is not to create model prisoners, right? To create model folks that are good in there, right? So can you unpack that a little bit? So then what is the whole point, right? As you're doing prison education.
Yeah. So the point is to create a learning community where everyone has voice and we are able to, I like to say that, so I think one of the things that I've learned from our students is like, so there's this, I'm trying to figure out how I want to answer this question. So there's a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh, and it says that when conditions are sufficient, something will manifest. And so I feel like what it is that we are doing is we are creating conditions, a culture, a learning community where our students can be their best self. And so we are tapping into purpose that is already there. And so we're just giving them the tools to be able to work with that, to draw it out, giving them the experience, the praxis. When we did, so I'll say this, so we did our body-centered practices for community healing course. And the students, it's about facilitating a book conversation on racial healing, and they're the facilitators. At the end of the course, they are given the opportunity to then go on the deck and organize their own peers and lead this facilitated discussion. And we met with them throughout their process. And one of the things that the student said is like, I never realized that I could do this. That I myself am a teacher and a facilitator. And so we're creating, again, an experience where it's a sufficient experience where something beautiful can come out of it. And that's them seeing themselves and what it is that they're capable of being able to do. We have students who tell us, I am smart and I actually want to go to college. How do I do that? So we're going in, we're believing in their potential that is already there. Great question, Nanette. Thank you.
With the people in jail. And we had like a Bible study with them. And we send these books out for them. And then they would read them and answer the questions. And then they'd come back to us. And then we read everything that they wrote. And sometimes we wound up creating friendships between them. And it was very good. And you had to go to the jail and they would train you how to do this. So we went to DuPage jail and did that. And it was very enlightening for all of us and for all the people that we interacted with. And I thought it was really good, you know.
Yeah.
So
that's part of that mutual transformation,
yeah,
right? Where you walk in different or you leave different than when you arrived
yeah.
because of the friendship, the relationship that was formed.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
How do you overcome the fear factor?
The fear factor, say more. Say more about the fear factor.
Okay, we all have things in our mind as to how people are in prison and things that they do to go to prison. You might want to help, but how do you overcome that in the back of your mind of what you might be walking into? I mean, I'm afraid of prison. I don't try to have anything to do with it. I was in an organization where someone would volunteer to go to jail. It wasn't me.
Okay, yeah.
And I would tell them, I don't, you have so many conceptions of what it's like. You might get in there and might not get out, you know. So how do you overcome that fear factor to go in there to deal with people when you already have this preconceived notion of how they are?
That's a great question. So, and I wanna, so I think that there is, I hear you. There are times where I walk into the jail and I feel a little nervous too. Just last week, we went to the jail and the door was locked and we couldn't get out. And I had this moment of, I don't like this. Like, I'm not okay with this, you know? And so it's real, right? So I want to normalize that. I think that there's also, and I think that being aware of it is really important, right? Understanding your own limitations, what it is that you're willing and not willing to do, right? And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's honest for yourself, right? I think there's a different thing. I think there's another part of it where it's just like, am I othering somebody? Am I stigmatizing somebody without knowing their story? Have I allowed this label for them to define their full existence? That's a different thing, right? And I think that's an opportunity where we got to be honest with ourselves about our own bias, right? And then do some work around that. And I think part of how we can do that work is reading books, autobiographies written by people who have the experience of incarceration, watching the 13th Amendment, right? Like, I think that there's ways that we can do some educating to help prepare us to be able to form those relationships. But we can't do that if we're not honest with ourselves. And we can't do that if we're forcing ourselves to go and be in a place because we feel like we need to be there, right? And I think that the honesty is key to how we start to overcome the fear. And I would also say, my grandmother's hands, some of those body-centered practices that we did in the beginning, they might seem really trivial and really simplistic, but they actually really do help. There have been times, we were in a class just the other day, and there was a lot of scuffling that was going on outside of the jail or outside of our classroom. And it was really disruptive. And I had a moment while I was speaking and I was just like, we need to stop. Let's ground ourselves. Let's breathe. Let's return to here. And it instantly made me feel safe in a very unsafe environment. And so, because I think that sometimes our notions of safety can be irrational, right? Like there might not be a real perceived threat that we're experiencing, but our body's experiencing in that way. And so I think those body-centered practices can help us as we move through working through the fear that we have. And I will also say the last thing is that some of us have been really hurt and harmed, right, by folks. Right. And so I think that we don't want to re-traumatize ourselves. So if we're not ready to be in a place because we need to deal with some of our own stuff, then we need to do those things too. So thank you for that question.
Thank you. Your presentation was very enlightening. And the issue I want to talk about is recidivism and how the church can be a catalyst for that not happening. Our church at one point in time had a relationship with the Community Renewal Society.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the work that you all do requires the expertise, let me say that. A seminar is not going to make me ready to bring people into my church. So what I'm looking for are resources for collaboration, where possibly they can meet in our fellowship hall. We can open our doors, but I'm not going to, just as Elder Philpott was saying, I'm not ready personally to lead a group to thwart recidivism. Can you help us do that?
So are you asking me specifically to come in and, okay, okay, I want to understand the question. Yeah. No, I think that you asking a really great question, and it's a really important question. And so I would say, first and foremost, I think it would start with a conversation internally with your church to make sure that everybody's on board with wanting to do this, because you got to get the buy-in from everybody, right? And then once you get the buy-in and everybody's in support, then I would suggest going into your church congregation and just say like, hey, like, does anybody here know folks who are formerly incarcerated that have been doing some of this work that we can reach out to and maybe build a consulting relationship with them and see how they might want to be able to come in and do some assessing and help us build a program and a plan, right? And I would say that that should be compensated work, right? And so I don't know if that means as part of your planning process, working to kind of see like what types of donations you can raise to be able to help support this person to come in and help with you all, to be able to put a strategy together. And then I would say the other thing that you could do as well is going and building relationships with those community-based organizations, and you can do like a referral process, right? So like Safer Foundation, it's called CARE Support, I believe. So there's organizations out there that do those types of things. I also know that there are churches that actually can't remember, I think it's called In the Vine. I think that might be the name of the church, but where they actually have like a time where people in the in their community need support filling out a job application or getting transportation somewhere. And so they have volunteers that are available to kind of do some of those direct services. I think that that's like a simple thing that you all could probably do, is forming those relationships to kind of create that referral base, and then organize your people to see if they want to be available to help somebody do a job resume, right? Or fill out a job application.
I'm only the male attending this session. Thank you for the beautiful presentation. That was a valuable one. I love the present ministry. That is why I came here. Thank you for inviting my economic students to attend this seminar. I'm joining the last question. That is how we can do in practical. I wonder the tables you showed, that shows 13% only getting a job after releasing from the jail. In our diocese in India, we have a jail ministry. They were doing a lot of things. Can you do you have the facility, if someone comes from the jail, you are doing through the initiative of McCormick Seminary, some courses. If someone comes like that of after getting calling from releasing from the prison, have any chance to study the theological studies here. Then the other one is so many initiatives you talked about that that is very valuable one. It is community support. Only from the community support only can survive after release from the jail. But in India also, when someone comes from the prison, oh, the prison man is coming, so we can go to some other place. So many people don't like to talk to that people. Even to that family, son, wife, or the relatives also will treat us like the crime-related people.
Yeah.
That is the terrible one. How we can educate the community as a whole, how we can join as to give support as a church, or sometimes some churches will take initiative. How we can educate the church and the church leaders, have an initiative with the McCormick or this SBI initiative, or you are going to plan? I want to know. Thank you.
No, that's a great question. So what I'm hearing you ask is how, well, one, I think is, does McCormick provide, do we work with folks who are coming out of incarceration so if they want to get an MDiv or come here to McCormick, enroll in courses? Is that one of the questions? And then the other question is, how do we create communities of belonging for folks who have these? Okay, so those are great questions. So I would say that yes, McCormick does admit folks who have the experience of incarceration. Here, I know that we've actually removed, I believe, from our application, our admissions questions around if you have a criminal record. So ban the box was a whole movement that happened, and we went ahead and we removed that from our application. And then the other question is, I think that is what we're at. I think that you hit it on the head, right? Like, how do we create these communities of belonging? And I think that is the question that we're all kind of wrestling with here at the end of the day, right? And so I think that part, like basically, like I told our sister over here, is that I think that if your congregation as a community, you all have to agree that this is the direction that we want to go in. I've been in places where there isn't consensus around how folks want to engage with somebody who has the experience of incarceration. You can create more harm if you're not on board with how you're going to move forward, right? And then I would say again, folks who are closest to the problem are the ones that have the answers, right? And so part of that could be having that conversation and then asking the question, like, are there folks here in this space who have this experience and want to share in a non-disclosed way what it would look like for us to create this community of belonging, right? And so I think that there's ways that folks can work within their own congregation to be able to discern how to make some of those, create that community of belonging. I know specifically here at this institution, I know that we've gone through training as an institution to talk about those things. I know that there's buy-in, within the faculty and the staff around doing this work. And so that makes all the difference, the support, when you have those clear conversations. Did I answer your question? Okay.
Briefly, what are the two things that they mostly struggle with? You said housing, those who are out of jail and prison. Housing, and what's the other?
And employment.
Employment. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, well, thank you all for such a enlightening question and answer section of our workshop today. Much thanks to Gia.
Thank you all. I'll be good refocused.
For the presentation. I'm pretty sure all of you have learned something new today. I have learned something new. And it's very enlightening and encouraging to know that there is something in place for those who are incarcerated. I have experience with that from family members. It is not easy to deal with. On top of that, it's the preconceived notions that we have that everyone who's incarcerated is indeed guilty of what they say the system says they did, or guilty of being Black or of color. So we have to kind of just internalize ourselves and say, what kind of person am I going to be? What kind of person do I want to be? Am I going to be my brother's keeper, my sister's keeper? Am I going to step out on faith and allow God to use me to communicate with this person? To kind of step back and just say, I understand this situation. I'm not going to be judgmental because I don't want you to look at me for my flaws that I've had in the past or that I might continue to be doing. So we can't continue to do that for those people who are incarcerated. Once they're out, help as best we can. Not always financially, but could be. But sometimes it could just be to listen, to understand what it is that they might need, and maybe the resources, see if we can find some of the resources that they need to find gainful employment, housing, and those things. So today was a wonderful workshop and presentation by Gia, and I appreciate it. And I appreciate all of you with the questions, because it's something that we can take back to our local churches, our communities, and try to figure out a way in which we can too participate in helping those who are incarcerated and those who are re-entering society. All right. Well, as we move forward, we have about 10 minutes before lunch to do our business meeting. And what I want to do is to introduce to you all the coordinating team for the Presbyterian women. Myself, I am your moderator. Then we have our secretary, Linda Denberry and Mary Johnson. So please stand. We have our treasurer, Sharon Sims. Please stand. We have resources, Karen. And if you have not had an opportunity to see the resources on the table, those are resources for the Presbyterian women, the Presbytery, you name it. Karen is that person. And then we have Miss Alberta. Miss Alberta is our, what is it? What's your? No, she's gets the people for the research. And then Linda Wygant, she's our peace and justice. Ruby was our former moderator before myself. She's on the Senate level now, Senator Lincoln Trails. Ms. Joyce Philpott, right here. And Carmelita Colors over there. And then we have Nina. Nina's our publications, and she does communication. She does our Weavers. If you get a copy of the Weavers in the mail or online, Nina's the person. Okay, and Barbara Vaughn, she's somewhere. Okay, she's out in it. She's a part of our worship ministry. Yvonne is our cluster leader, moderator. She's somewhere. Okay, she's probably getting lunch together. Tracy is not here, but she's our missions person. Eulalie's not here. She's on our worship as well. Right. I'm trying to think. I think that's, oh, and Peggy Johnson is our gatherings person, our moderator. So that is your Presbyterian women. Yes, Linda Gibbony, she was one of our members, a very critical member. She's having some health challenges, so she's at home on Zoom. So hello, Linda. So if you have your program, what we do when we meet for our coordinating team meetings is we recite our Presbyterian women's purpose. And if you could just recite with me, Forgiven and freed by God in Jesus Christ and empowered by the Holy Spirit, we commit ourselves to nurture our faith through prayer and Bible study, to support the mission of the church worldwide, to work for justice and peace, and to build an inclusive, caring community of women that strengthens the Presbyterian Church USA and witnesses to the promise of God's kingdom. Thank you. In your packet, you have a secretary's report. That is the minutes from our fall gathering in 2022. It is a blue paper. If you can read over that really quickly, those are our minutes. It was done on Zoom. As you will remember, this is our first one back after COVID, and it is really good to be back in person, see everyone face to face. And after you've read it, I'll entertain a motion. Is there a motion to receive? It has been moved. Is there a second? It has been moved and second to receive the fall gathering minutes from October 22nd of 2022. All in favor? Any opposed? Minutes have been received. Next, we have our treasurer's report. Also in your packet on the left-hand side. I will ask Sharon to come if there's any questions regarding or to kind of just go over it. Yes, ma'am. Sharon, there's an asterisk with about the conference fund. The conference fund is funds that are put aside for the Triennium, the national women's gathering that's held every 3 years. So those funds are used for the representatives to travel to wherever it's being held. Correct. And there's usually 2 representatives that go, and that's based on the number of churches within our presbytery. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yes, ma'am. It's money that we receive through the Presbyterian women, but they're distributed to these agencies. But yeah, the treasurer sends the money out when we receive the donations from various churches. And a lot of churches send them directly, but sometimes they send it through us and we submit it. Any other questions on the treasurer's report? If none, is there a motion to receive? It's been moved. Is there a second? It has been moved and second to receive the treasurer's report. All in favor? Aye. Report has been received. Next, we have the Presbyterian Women Offering. This offering is a offering to the coordinating team for us to continue to function with publications, to do these gatherings. So that is what the Presbyterian Women Offering is. And there's an envelope that was also put into your folder. If you're interested in making a contribution, please put it in that envelope. And the check, if you're writing a check, it would be Presbyterian Women of Chicago. There are actually two envelopes in your folder. One is for a mission giving, and that is to the Solidarity Building Initiative. That's GIA's organization. That is our mission that we are supporting today. So if you want to contribute to that, you can in the envelope. She did show their website. If you wanted to donate on their website, you can do that as well. Donations can be given to Sharon, who was here. She's in the red. Resources. Karen, do you want to talk a little bit about the resources that you have? Okay, thank you. And then just a moment. Go ahead, Karen. All right, thank you, Karen. At this time, I would like to ask that Linda to come and just speak a little bit about peace and justice.
Good morning or barely good afternoon. Just a couple of words. We have had an example this morning of what it means to lift up peace and justice issues as Presbyterian Women of Chicago. But wanted to expand that list to just name a few other. And I so appreciated that Gia said, let's not call them issues because there are people, right? And our creation, what God made. So these are not just issues, but they are justice related themes that Presbyterian women are called to pay attention to. And so in addition to mass incarceration that we lifted up this morning, poverty, becoming anti-racism, communities, human trafficking, violence, promoting education, connecting us with women around the world. We're here in Chicago, but we are invited and called to be connected with our siblings all over the world to do this work together. And so it is a joy to be working with the Presbyterian Women of Chicago on peace and justice issues. So I hope you consider this an invitation to be in touch with us, the coordinating team. We would love to hear what you are doing in your congregations. If you need resources, please be in touch with us. We talked today about mutual aid and working collaboratively together and in partnership. So this is an invitation to visit the resource table, to be in conversation over lunch, to come up and talk with each other and with anyone on the coordinating team. We want to be in partnership and to be led by those conversations we have today. And one last shout out for the resource table, because it's peace and justice related. There's an ongoing book group conversation that you can have with Presbyterian women around the country. Read a book, have a virtual conversation. And so there's a sheet about that, wonderful books that are being talked about this very year, including What Kind of Christianity? A History of Slavery and Anti-Black Racism in the Presbyterian Church. So important conversations, and we are all invited to be part of that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Linda. That's my. Okay, I would like to ask Yvonne to just come real quick. Just to talk about, she's our cluster leader, moderator. And shout out to Miss Lily Cox. She was the cluster leader, moderator when I first came on board as a liaison.
She said, I'm a cluster leader, and I want you all to know that you're on my committee because you're cluster leaders too. Now, what that means is that you just spread the word about Presbyterian women. You can go back to your congregations and tell them what a wonderful time you had here. And then when we have other activities, other gatherings, make sure that the women of your congregation know and encourage them to attend, because sometimes you might say, well, look, why don't you ride with me? Because sometimes we don't want to go by ourselves. And if you know other Presbyterian women from different congregations, you know, just encourage them to become a part of, to be active with Presbyterian women. You know, maybe even people that aren't in your aren't Presbyterians, they can still come. So like I said, you are part of my committee. I think I have the largest committee. And I want to thank you all. Okay.
Thank you. And that goes both ways. If your church is having something and you want to reach out to other Presbyterian congregations or other people, you can let your liaison know, let us know, and we will put the word out there as well. And then you have more participation that way as well. Sure. This is part of our announcements. Can you hear her? Does she need the mic? Okay. Yeah.
Good afternoon. Sixth Grace Presbyterian Church will have their annual Women's Day event on Sunday, May 21st. We're at 600 East 35th Street, right on the corner of 35th and Cottage. And I have the name of our speaker. You want to wait for me to pull it out? Well, anyway, we're going to have a great speaker and we want you to join us. After our service, we're going to have a fabulous meal. So come on out and join us, 11 a.m., May 21st. Circle your calendars.
Sixth Grace, May 21st, 11 o'clock a.m. service. May 21st. All right, and Nina, you want to come up? She's part of our publications. Well, yeah, the people can't see you on if you.
Well, is it on?
It's on.
Oh, my goodness. Okay.
You good?
Yeah, I'm good. Okay. In the realm of keeping in contact, you have a sheet, it's either green or white in your folder. And if you nicely print your email, I will put you on the email list for little reminders, like we reminded you it was going to be on Zoom at the last minute. And the other part is, whatever you're doing, if you try to send it to me, we haven't been doing a lot of coverage during COVID, but if you have something you want to put in the Weavers, you can email it to me. Oh, and we're going to have a drawing at lunch.
Okay, did everyone hear the green copy in your folder? If you fill it out, there will be a drawing during lunch for a subscription to the Horizons, which is the Presbyterian Women magazine. And with that subscription comes the Bible study that's put out every year. Okay, I believe that's all of our announcements. That ends our business meeting. And we are going to prepare for lunch. Yes, ma'am. Lily Brown, and what was the second name? Oh, Mary Colors, yes. Okay. Oh. Okay, we will continue to pray for their families. We're going to give those to Sharon in the red sweater. And Willa Brown, that's Ruby's mother-in-law, passed away a couple weeks ago. Yeah. So we'll keep the family in prayer as well. Okay, at this time, let us bow our heads for a word of prayer, which will end our business meeting. And yes. Okay. Oh, most gracious and heavenly Father, we thank you for today. It has been such an enlightening morning and early afternoon. We thank you for everything that we have heard. Lord, as it resonates in our minds and in our hearts, let us be better and do better and be there for those that are in most need of us. We would do what Jesus would have us to do. And as we prepare to end this portion of our service and partake of lunch, let the food that we partake that has been prepared on our behalf be a nourishment to our bodies. This we ask in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. And Yvonne will come and speak on.
Breath and exhale into a moment of silence. To watch, to feel, and to experience you unlapping the floodgates of our hearts. To feel you unbridling our tongues. And to know that you are bending your ear and extending your hand towards us. May we hear your voice and what you're calling us to in this moment. The places where we need to build, the places where we need to stand in the gap, and the words that we need to speak that others might be freed and healed. And it's in Jesus' name that we pray and say together, amen. Amen. So it was a lot that we took in this morning with Gia. That was a lot. You could feel it in the room, the heaviness in the room. You could also feel the pressure in the room to run out and do something about it, or to know some things that maybe we really don't know, to act in some ways that maybe we haven't been equipped to act, but we wanted to do something. You could feel all of that in the room. And you can feel the pressure of being a Christian too, right? Like, oh, well, we're supposed to be in the prisons. We're supposed to be setting the captives free. We're supposed to be feeding the hungry. We're supposed to be preaching the good news. We're supposed to be. All of that was present in the room. It was heavy. And sometimes we can get hard on ourselves. Well, why haven't I been? I had the idea to, but why won't they? Nobody will cooperate. What am I supposed to do? So now I got to go back and make everybody concerned about this one thing. I got to make everybody do something. Just one more thing that I have to try and control in my life. It was heavy. And it was all present in this room today. And that was the beauty of when Gia would stop and say, okay, let's check in with ourselves. Let's breathe. I like to call those moments, let's forgive ourselves in those moments. Let's take a breath and forgive ourselves for not doing all the things that this moment has made us feel like we should have been doing on top of everything else. Let us breathe and forgive ourselves. Let us let go of that weight. And not that we're not called to do something, but sometimes we can overwhelm ourselves with what we're supposed to do, or think we're supposed to do, or what we're called to do. That we leave and we go, oh, that was good. And then we do nothing. So what about asking questions? Just to learn a little bit more, just to see if that's where you are to focus. Because one thing we have a problem with as Christians, we believe we're supposed to focus on all things, everywhere, at all times, and all people. And then nobody will be served if I don't do it. Nobody will be served if we all don't do it. But the truth is, we all have our lane. And we can collaborate, but we have a lane. And today I know you're wondering, well, why Habakkuk? After all of that heaviness in the room. Because I believe that Habakkuk was dealing with some very heavy things. And Habakkuk had the nerve to say, how long, oh Lord? Habakkuk said, I'm not, no. How long you gonna do this? How long is this gonna be happening? What are you gonna do, God? And then Habakkuk said, now I'm gonna do what you call me to do in this moment, but I wanna know, what are you going to do? And then I'll respond when you tell me which way I'm supposed to move. Now I'm gonna still do what you call me to do today. And Linda, I'm gonna call you out. Linda does food and just harvest and planting and gardening. So this is what she does. And after a day like today, she might feel like, well, I need to add 15 more things. Wait. But Habakkuk did was said, you gave me this job at this watch post, so I'm gonna still do that until you tell me exactly what to do. So I don't have to run out of here today and try and do everything. I can still go to my watch post and I can still say, how long, oh Lord, and I can wait for you to direct me. So I don't have to spread myself in 15 different places. Or get down on myself for feeling like, well, I'm only doing this little piece, God. Habakkuk had the nerve to ask God a question, how long? And then Habakkuk had the nerve to say, I'm gonna go to my watch post until you respond. Why do you let me see all of this, oh God? And maybe it's to bring it before God and say, okay, God, I've seen all this violence, God, let me pray. God, I've seen all this destruction, let me pray. God, I've seen all this death and trouble and turmoil, let me pray. but not by myself. Let me get a prayer partner. Come on, y'all, let's pray. And not let's just pray in vain, but let's pray about it, but pray for the people who are on the front lines of this work. Let's pray for Gia and all the advocates. Let's pray. And then God tell me which way I'm to go. What's my contribution? And maybe my contribution is, if they are protesting, then I'll bring sandwiches. That's a ministry. Feed the hungry. Maybe my contribution is making a contribution. Maybe my contribution is now being trained to do prison ministry in a real impactful way. But everybody doesn't have to run out into the jail. That's not where everyone is called to, but somebody is. Somebody, let me put an IES on that, somebody are called to that. Let us forgive ourselves for the fears we may have or the judgments we may have about those who are incarcerated. Well, they did it. They did the crime, now they got to do the time. Forgive ourselves for those judgments and ask God to open up our eyes that we might see. That's what Habakkuk did. I'm going to my watch post and I'm going to see what you respond. So I'm going to ask my question. I'm going to do the work that you called me to do. I'm going to wait. I'm going to listen. I'm going to write the vision. And then I'm going to give it to other folks to run. It was heavy in this room today. But Habakkuk helps us by asking the question, how long, O Lord? Habakkuk helps us by saying, how long, O Lord, shall I cry for help and you will not listen, or cry to you violence and you will not save? And what's interesting about this is that at the top of chapter 1, Habakkuk says, how long will I cry for help, but you will not listen? But by the end, he says, I will stand at my watch post. I will keep watch to see what you will say to me, and he will answer concerning my complaint. So he started out saying, but you're not listening, God. And by the end, he says, but I'm going to wait because you will answer concerning my complaint. When are you going to listen, God? Oh, I know you're listening because you're going to respond to my concern and my complaint. But I'm going to wait. I'm going to still do the work that you called me to in this very moment. I'm going to wait for you to tell me the vision for this next phase of my ministry. I'm going to wait for you to tell me, so that I know I won't be doing it just so I can be patted on the back and say, you are good. I'm going to wait on the Lord. That's what Habakkuk said. Habakkuk asked the question and then laid it out for God. I cry to you violence, you will not save. Why do you make me see wrongdoing and trouble? Destruction and violence are before me. Strife and contention arise. So the law becomes slack and justice never prevails. The wicked surround the righteous. Therefore judgment comes forth perverted. I will stand in my watch post and station myself on the rampart. I will keep watch to see what he will say to me and what he will answer concerning my complaint. Then the Lord answered me and said, write the vision, make it plain on tablets so that a runner may read it. For there is still a vision for the appointed time. It speaks of the end and does not lie. If it seems to tarry, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. So when God answers, you still don't just go running out. When God answers, what do? You write the vision. So we'll make sure we're doing what God is calling us to do, and God is always calling us to do. But it's not in our own might and in our own strength. Are we willing to ask God the tough questions? And then if you're as impatient as I am, are we willing to wait until God will? And then are we willing to have the discipline to write the vision that God gives us? And can we make it plain? I know we're in an institution right now, in a higher ed institution, and we have our degrees and we have our letters behind our name, but sometimes we can write some things and go, wait, what? Sometimes we don't even understand what we just wrote. Like, wait a minute. Can we get it to the point where every reader can understand it? I think the Chicago Sun-Times is written on what, a third grade level? But I go to the Chicago Sun-Times, honest, because I can read it, I can understand it. With all my degrees and all the accolades and all of that, I still want to understand. So are we willing to ask the tough question of God? And my big mama can't see to read. Oh boy. She did not believe in asking God questions. So it's taken a long time for me to even be able to say, oh, I'm gonna ask God a question. Because I always hear my big mama in the back of my head, my great big mama. Can't see to read, West Point Missionary Baptist Church. You don't ask questions of God. You let God do what God is gonna do. And it took me a long time to get that voice out of my head that you cannot ask God questions. And so Habakkuk for me is a liberative voice. Ask God the tough questions. How long? And then wait. That might be tougher than even asking a question. Wait up. But work while you wait. Do the work I've given your hands today while you wait for the response, because God will respond. Justice will prevail. And write the vision. Make it plain that any runner may read it. And remember, there is a vision for this appointed time that will speak to the end. It will not lie. So trust the response of God. Trust the response of God. Trust the response of God with your health, with your mind, with any conflict in your life. Trust the response of God. Trust the response of God, for it is surely coming. And we can make a quick transition to the communion table, where God says in Psalm 23, thou preparest the table before me in the presence of my enemies. Mass incarceration, not the people, the system of mass incarceration is an enemy. White supremacy is an enemy. What are the enemies I should be dealing with right now? God says, thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. God has a table prepared for you in the face of whatever's happening in your life. Whatever you're struggling with right now, thou preparing a table before you in the presence of your enemy. And sometimes you're not talking. I gotta do more. In the presence table in the room. This is a table where we can get answers of enough. Where no matter your situation, no matter what's going on, no matter how heavy you are feeling, this table calls you. Folks were dealing with a whole lot when Jesus called those disciples around the table. Now, Jesus knew the bigger picture, the disciples did not. Jesus knew who was betrayed. Jesus knew who was feeling overwhelmed. Jesus knew all those things. And Jesus still said, come to this table. And let me share this with you. And then on the night before Jesus was betrayed, before Jesus was killed, Jesus took the cup, took the bread first. Gave it to his my body for you. And in the same way, Jesus took the cup, gave thanks to God. And gave it to his disciples and said, hey, this is my blood of the new covenant. For many in the remission of your sins. And as often as you eat of this and drink of this cup, do this in remembrance of me. So in the face of uncertain death, in the face of all the chaos, Jesus said, eat and drink and do it in remembrance of me. There is in the name and of Jesus. So in this moment, the table has been prepared for you. And now, anyone who wants to do intention and come up and break the bread, because I know that's pretty interesting. Body of Christ is for you. Take and eat. This is the cup of new life and new covenant, poured out for you and for many in remission of sin. Take and drink. Anyone having trouble with that, I can come to you and we can do that thing. Here I come. Yes. Here I come. Anybody else? God, we are grateful for the presence of this table in our life. That you, oh God, prepared a table of grace before us. And we are grateful for the abundance in which is displayed. We are grateful. And not just an element of bread and wine, but God, the element of power and empowerment and healing and health and hope. May it be ours because we've come and gathered in this place together today. For what information we've received, oh God, that may still feel heavy enough. God, I ask that you remind us that you are a burden bearing a heavy load, and that we do not have to carry anything alone. You are always there to lift it and to carry it, oh God. And we are grateful for that. So let our time together today have not been in vain, but be that we might be edified in some new, inspiring, wild, and wonderful way. May we go from this place being clear that you are with us, being clear that you will answer our questions, being clear that you will respond, being clear that we are the right position, we are to make it that a runner may read. We go forward now knowing that you are God and you are with us. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.
Much thanks to everyone for coming out today. It was a wonderful morning and afternoon. I hope you enjoyed it. I did. And the Presbyterian Women Coordinating Team thanks you so much for your continued participation. And for those of you who helped to plan this event, the committee, thank you so much. You did a wonderful job. And the winner for the Horizons magazine was Barbara Baker. So you will get a subscription to the Horizons magazine. And for anyone who has a birthday offering, please give those to Sharon. And that concludes our afternoon. And until we meet again, be blessed.